Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners and welcome back. In a recent episode, we discussed the disappearance of Dylan Koshman, a 21-year-old man who, during the early morning hours of October 11th, 2008, walked out of his home in Edmonton after a fight with his cousin and was never seen again. Initially treated as a missing persons case, it wasn't until 2016, conveniently when CBC was producing a special about the case, that police publicly acknowledged what many had long suspected. Dylan's disappearance was being investigated as a homicide. During our prior episode on this story, Madeleine Klein and I speculated as to why it took so long to redirect the investigation towards foul play, and, well, perhaps tonight we're going to be able to shed some light on it. Before the case was handed over to a specialized missing persons or homicide unit, then Edmonton Police Service Detective Tom Wilson was tasked with figuring out what happened to the young man from Saskatchewan who went missing after a fight with his cousin. And that now retired detective is able to candidly share his memories of those early days working the Koshman case. He can talk about what was known, the questions he asked, what might have been missed, and what's going to need to happen to solve this case. So let's get into it. I'm Jordan Bonaparte, and in this episode of Nighttime, retired cop Tom Wilson is going to join us and discuss his work on the Dylan Koshman case.
Koshman was last seen during the early morning of October 11, 2008, leaving his home in the South Edmonton area after getting into an argument with his roommates. He then disappeared without a trace. With little details to go off, Edmonton police say the file status is suspended and will stay that way without any new information, tips, or DNA advancement.
Tom, if you could just introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you? And what are you doing nowadays to keep busy?
Well, I'm a retired police officer from the Edmonton Police Service. I joined there in May of 1988. Retired in December of 2013, so it's just shy of 26 years. During that time with the EPS, I did, mostly frontline stuff, patrol division for the most part.
What would, frontline policing, what kind of tasks would that be? Is this like a traffic cop, or what would a frontline police officer mean to someone who doesn't work in that industry?
Good question. No, not a traffic cop. Traffic is actually a specialized unit in Edmonton where you go out and do traffic enforcement or serious collisions involving people who are injured enough to be admitted to hospital or dead. Frontline policing, you basically have to start on patrol for, at least back in the day, you're expected to be on patrol for 5 or 6, 7 years, where you're just responding. You're in a car, you're responding to calls that come in and conducting the investigations associated to whatever complaint might be happening.
So I'm just in my mind, I'm thinking kind of like the family doctor of policing. You just show up and who knows what's going to come across your desk. It could be anything from shoplifting to domestic violence to mental health crisis. A frontline police officer is going to be a mixed bag of calls, I would assume.
Yeah, first responder to whatever's happening. And then, of course, if things develop, then specialized units might get involved. So if you go to a collision where somebody has died, then you call out a traffic unit. And if you go to a homicide, then you call out homicide unit. But you do the initial investigation, whereas then the detectives or whoever else will follow up whatever you've done.
All right. And you said you've been retired for some time. Have you just been sitting with your legs up on the beach since then, or what's the last 10 or so years of your life been like?
On occasion. I try to make sure I can do that as well, but I'm a private investigator. I just do private investigations, keep myself busy.
Yeah, I'm always just curious about the work of a private investigator, and I do hear several. I've met several retired officers myself that have gone in that direction afterwards. I know we're not here to talk about your private investigation business, but I think a lot of people are surprised that even exists outside of the movies. When you say you do private investigation, would it be are you talking I'm going to hire you to investigate if my spouse is having an affair, or is this more so like working for like companies doing, insurance and these kinds of things? Like, what is it you do?
Well, I've done pretty much everything there is. Yes, the cheating spouse thing. Looked into that. Test shopping for chains, dollar store, let's say. Going and doing test shopping to ensure the employees are doing the right thing, or investigating where a box had fallen on somebody at one of these dollar stores, or getting witness statements, interviewing people, going to a scene of an accident or where maybe a pedestrian was hit and they have a civil suit pending to take pictures, get their version of the events firsthand, that type of thing. There's a lot of things a person can do.
All right. Well, let's go back to October-ish of 2008. As you talked just moments ago, you were describing being like a frontline police officer for the Edmonton Police Service. What brings us together today is is your work on the Dylan Koshman case. He was a young man who's been missing since October of 2008 after a disagreement with his cousin turned violent. What I'd like to know, first of all, is what exactly was your role in the Dylan Koshman case? I know you weren't on the case from beginning to end, but for the period of time that you worked on that case, what was your role and what was your involvement in it?
At the time that this happened, I was a detective at the criminal investigation section in the division, the area where Dylan went missing. So what had happened, we had a very, very busy time in that October. I can go into that further later, but he went missing, I think it was 11th of October. And, there was a fight and then there was a time lag and such. So eventually, when the missing person complaint came in, they contacted, it was called CIS, Criminal Investigation Section, the CIS office where the detectives worked that I was in. They contacted us to come out and just take the investigation over, because the patrol officer takes the initial call, like I said, do up the initial report, and then they go off to the next fire to put out. So my involvement was to go to the location and just do an investigation, really. Just start almost at ground one again. And I was there with another police officer, detective, Brian was his name, senior to me. So two of us were there going over the area and talking to the people at the house.
And so just so I'm understanding like kind of how you get involved. So there would have initially been like a cop who probably responded like with the plan of like, breaking up a fight or something like that, and did like a very preliminary kind of collect the facts investigation, and then it get passed on to like to your department to do a more thorough investigation. Like, am I getting that right?
Yeah, in a sense. In this case, it was because you have the patrol constables. You have a bunch of constables out there taking calls, and they belong to a patrol sergeant. So you're part of a squad where the sergeant is in charge. And the sergeant is the same rank as a detective. He has to do different works. A sergeant supervises and a detective investigates. So knowing that the patrol constables just couldn't spend days and days and weeks or however long on this type of call. They don't. They take the initial call, and the patrol sergeant got hold of the CIS office. The staff sergeant said, look, we need detectives out here to look at this. It's going to take a lot more resource than what a patrol constable can muster up. So that's how we got involved.
I understand. And now, at the time that police responded and that you got involved, and I think you've mentioned this already, there was some time delay. There was several days before Dylan was reported missing after he's last been seen. So you're already kind of a couple days behind the investigation or behind the story as it develops. But when you get on the scene and you begin your investigation, what facts did you have? What avenues did you think this case was going to take you on? Like, and what was it considered as? Was it did you see it as a likely runaway, or was there from the beginning thoughts of foul play? Like, want to get a sense of, within the first week of working on this case, what were your thoughts and what did you know?
Yeah, going back, of course, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was last seen on October 11th at about 2 a.m.
You're exactly right, yeah.
And so we got, if I'm not mistaken, we got involved, I think, on the 17th of October is when the investigation relative to this guy's not around anymore. We don't know what's happened to him. So we were behind, and I think also with that there was a changeover in personnel working patrol at the time. So whoever went to that initial call where the complaint of the disturbance was, those people were on days off. So now we have another set of constables going to the place to look into a new report of a missing person. This guy left after a fight and everything else. And that's really all we knew. We were eventually told who the family members were. And so, yeah, basically all we knew is there was a fight that night, 6 days earlier. When the constables arrived at the scene, there was no indication of any fight going on, and, no lights on. We don't make problems. If we go to a call where there's a fight reported earlier, depending on how long we take to get there with other calls on the board, you get there and if all the lights are off at the house and all the lights are off in the neighbor's house and you get out and walk around and there's no sounds of anything going on like a fight or anybody in distress, then yeah, you walk away from it and you don't start phoning people and start getting people riled up again at 4:00 in the morning.
Yeah, I can understand that, but when the time comes that days later Dylan still doesn't surface and he's now missing, just in my mind, I immediately would be heavily concerned that something is going on, likely connected to that disturbance days earlier. Do you recall initially going and searching the place and maybe asking some questions? Do you recall the mood within the investigation of, could this be a guy just ran away, or is something much worse happening here? Do you recall kind of that feeling in the case?
Absolutely, I do. I remember going to the house, basically being informed of generally what's happened over the last 6 days and the names of the people. And I remember going into the house. We walked up the driveway, which is to the left of the house, and then through the back door, and from there it leads down into the basement, and then a few steps up into a kitchen area. And I remember looking out throughout the whole house. I remember the older, was it Colin? Was that the older?
Yeah, Colin was the older cousin involved in the actual physical fight with Dylan, and Colin was also said to be the one that was evicting or kicking Colin out of the place in the near future, which seems to be what kind of kickstarted the whole problem there. But yeah,
and I remember that. Yeah, and I remember talking to him. He was sitting at the kitchen table. And we were talking, and it was a good conversation. He was a big guy. He was, generally he's pissed off. He wasn't in a good mood. And he complained about his cousins, Earl. And he spoke about Dylan specifically, saying, hey, can I swear? Are we cool with this?
Absolutely. Go nuts.
He basically said, these fucking cousins of mine, they do this all the time. Whatever he said, they run off or go away, and they're like a bunch of rubber bands, he said. They just keep bouncing back. And I remember that because I carried that with me in my career later on, thinking that's the first time I ever heard that described in that way. He describes somebody as a rubber band, and they go and come back, and they're just basically a bunch of dumbass cousins, and this is the way they all live and get along. And then I remember talking to the girl. I remember.
Yeah, so this would have been Colin's brother Nick's girlfriend was in the house at the time.
Nick and whatever the girl's name was. I remember talking to them in the house as well. I remember looking around. I remember going outside because there's a pickup truck parked on the driveway, and it had a bunch of crap in the back of it and inside. And if I remember correctly, it was blue in color. And I thought, because I started thinking, okay, wait a minute, this guy's gone for however many days now, no jacket on. It was October. And it just didn't seem viable. Like a guy in good shape, wandering. I knew the area. I lived there all my life, just blocks away. So I was very familiar with the area. So it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And I thought, okay, something is not right here. So that's kind of the direction I started heading in. And we searched the yard. We searched where he was last seen going out. I tried to think in my mind, can he be buried here? Because just in October, or when was that? In June of that same year, I had a case where I was standing on the person who was buried from a missing person complaint that I was investigating. So, I thought to myself, could this be another case of this where the person's buried right on site here? So, we did search and look around. I think I remember also talking to family members, and they had a private investigator And then I interviewed Colin, Nick, and I don't remember the girl's name. Sorry, I wish I could remember it. But I interviewed those three people.
When you say the girl, you're talking about Nick's girlfriend who was in the house at the time of the incident.
Yeah. I like I said, I can't remember her name, but I interviewed her, Nick, and Colin at the police station individually. And I also, there was another cousin who took off right away after that and went back to Moose Jaw.
Yeah, his name is Cameron, who was invited. Dylan invited him to spend like the weekend in Edmonton. It was the long weekend that this happened. Yeah.
And so he took off to Moose Jaw rather quickly, and that kind of put a red flag in my mind, thinking, why would a guy take off so quickly after all this and not stick around? So unfortunately, though, I had to get the local police officers there to interview Cameron. I never spoke to him or saw him at all. So some interview was done with him. And from after interviewing those people, I remember we also got the search managers involved, which is a section of DPS and civilian search and rescue teams. And they did a whole search of that area with dogs and civilian search managers. And I remember we also had a tip come in that his body was wrapped up in a carpet in a ravine quite a few miles away, and that was searched as well. And I think that and finally, after I did all that, what more can you do? We've searched the area, we've talked to everybody involved. I remember there was a big to-do about the paper towel or something that had blood on it, and I would have been the guy. I would have been the guy that refuted that. I think that was me. They gave it to me, and even if it wasn't me, and somebody gave that to me now, I'd still say no. It holds no evidentiary value. It's just throw it away. That's what it is. We know there was a fight that took place, and there's going to be blood. So that was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. I remember when I heard about that, they found paper towel with blood on it, and I thought, like, yeah, it's interesting that it's in the home, but again, there would be such an easy explanation, like there was a fight, there's blood on a paper towel, that's not going to bust a case wide open or anything. Whether it's Colin's blood or Dylan's blood, there was a fight.
Yeah.
So
what's it going to do? Absolutely nothing. Yeah, so.
But when you're working on this case, even in these early days when doing these interviews with everybody involved in searching the scene, did this feel, or do you remember this feeling like a regular missing persons case, or was there a part of you that was thinking this was more than likely involving foul play? And I ask that just because the details of the case seem so illogical, like a young man just kind of running off without his jacket or whatever into the Edmonton night to not be found again. It just doesn't seem plausible.
Well, I've had people leave from other scenarios like that in my career. They walk off, they're all pissed off, they're drunk and everything else. Then they get discovered later on. Usually, because they just want to go away and, damage a bus stop or something with their anger. But this, it didn't have the best feel to me, but I can't just go and feel alone, of course. I don't know.
Yeah.
I need something. And really there wasn't anything. There's nothing. I understand they were the last to see him. So, they do draw a flag to themselves, but I can't make people say something or do something. So we were at a roadblock. We searched, we talked. I don't know what else.
And I don't know how specifically you remember this part of it, but even the story of how Dylan came to leave out the back door, in everything I read, I couldn't really understand exactly how it all happened in the house. Like, I understand that there was a fight that started inside and moved outside, but I couldn't get a sense of exactly how Dylan left the scene and who saw him actually walk out of the home. Do you remember any of those details as far as what story you got about Dylan leaving?
Yeah, I do recall that they mentioned there is the confrontation inside the doorway, the landing, and then up into the kitchen where I was later talking to Colin. And there was a disagreement and pushing and shoving and fighting and everything else. And these guys are big, or at least Colin was. And he indicated that he basically kicked them out the back door into obviously a backyard, and that he saw him storming off to the back gate, out the back gate, and turned left, which would have been out west and along the south side of 34 Avenue. which is just a grassy walkway next to the main road.
Yeah, in this area, like I've never been to Edmonton, but in my mind, I'm picturing this as being like within a city where there's not going to be a large river or lake or forest that he could have easily walked into. Where this happened, would there be like kind of natural areas like that he could possibly have ended up easily without being seen? Or would this be in a pretty developed area that this all happened?
It's all developed. It backs onto actually the main highway that leads to Calgary from Edmonton. So it's a very populated, busy area. Off to the west, not even a kilometer away, is the Derrick Golf and Country Club, which is a big private golf course. And a ravine area to the south of that, just off of Westbrook Drive. So there are areas in the area, White Mud Creek, Black Mud Creek, and the golf course, but no developing areas. It was all developed and housed already.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember through your interviews with everybody who was in the home, namely the cousins and Nick's girlfriend, did you get any sense that they were hiding something or avoiding questions, or did it seem like they were open to answering questions to you? Do you have any memories of how those interviews felt?
Yeah, I do. Starting with Nick, he was a nice. I don't know what term. He's a geeky guy, kind of a geeky guy, nice guy, and he wasn't a confrontational guy. He wasn't a loudspeaker or anything like that. And I remember doing the interview with him and watching the interview tape afterwards. And it struck me that this guy, at one point when we were talking, was like catching the whole gist of this. Like, holy fuck, is this guy dead? And did they think we did something to him? Like, he was kind of shocked in terms of that. Colin's demeanor was, these guys are fucking idiots. I put up with these guys all the time. I'm sick and tired of them. I don't know what else to tell you.
Yeah, and now I'm here at this interview wasting more of my time because of these guys.
Yeah,
like
because of these guys. He's pissed right off at his cousin. And the girl, she's just like the caught up in the middle of this stuff, like, what the hell is going on? And then she starts piecing it together like Nick did, and it's like, holy shit, no, like this is not what I know, or this is not what happened, or this is not what I'm a part of. So they all had good interviews. They were very forthright, helpful. They had just the right amount of differences between their interviews and what they said to show that, perhaps these stories aren't aligned beforehand and that they didn't have a story straight. They were good interviews.
That's it. That's interesting. As an investigator, like if you interview three people and they all have the exact same story with the same details, that would raise some suspicion.
It would, yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
And like I said, the one cousin who took off to Saskatchewan, I think it was Moose Jaw, I'm not sure. I never spoke to him, and I don't know what his interview was like, so I don't have any details on that. But the thing I found odd is how much Colin despised his cousins and all their bullshit, and how he didn't care about Dylan leaving because he figured, fuck, he'll come back. These guys bounce back like rubber bands, like he said. And the one cousin going off like that, the math didn't really necessarily make sense.
But something not making complete sense. Is it enough to really move an investigation forward quickly? So I understand at some point it goes from your hands to another department that I think would either be the missing persons or homicide team. Tell me about when the investigation is no longer your responsibility and someone else takes it on, and what would lead to that happening? What would justify that happening?
Oh, well, there's specialized units, missing persons, so that would lead to it. But to compound all of this, we had another really big case hit us, and you may know it or not. It's the Twitchell case.
Oh, Mark Twitchell.
Mark Twitchell, yeah. So we had to deal with that at this very same time. It came in, I think Twitchell's thing started, man, it would have been someplace here. But it basically, that day, the 17th or so, we had to start working on him because homicide was too busy. It was a crazy summer, 2008. So Mike Tabler, a detective I worked with, Brian, the fellow I worked with on this one to start with, they both got shipped over to Twitchell's case right away and started interviewing him and dealing with that. And I was stuck with this by myself. So they said, no, just send it off to missing persons and they'll do the follow-up.
Wow, I'm just putting the timeline together because the Mark Twitchell case, people would know his story as the Dexter killer, where he seemed to be inspired by the television show Dexter. It was October of 2008 that he is said to have tricked some guy into coming to on a date or something to a garage where he eventually murdered him and was convicted of it. I didn't realize that was basically the same month, like within weeks of Dylan's disappearance. And that also started as a missing persons case. It was the victim was John Altinger, I believe, who was reported missing until they eventually Yeah, wow. Yeah. I didn't put that together, but something like that happens, that is going to disrupt every other investigation that's on the stove at a slow boil, so to speak.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that's why people miss these things. I listened to the original show, and there was a comment there that after certain things weren't found, the police just went back in the donut shop and hung out. That's kind of not fair. We were really busy. We were dealing with a lot of things here, and these two at the same time. And like I said, I had another missing person who was killed and buried right at the house. So people need to have an appreciation that we don't have magical powers. We're busy. And that's how, and everybody has a unit. Like I said, missing persons took this over. Later in my career, I went to Vice Unit for the last 2 years of my career, and I worked in the same office as missing persons. The two officers there were friends of mine, and I said, I'm taking this one probably after I retire. I've got Dylan Koshman's picture right here that I carried in my briefcase and my clipboard, and I had another one in my desk. And I still have it today. And I told these guys, I said, is this thing ever going to get solved, do you think? And so he let me see the file. And some interesting things were found through missing persons and everything else that I didn't know about. So it still got worked on and still got additional information brought forward and worked on. But it's a dead end at this point. I think it was mentioned in another show that somebody, we just need, there's no physical evidence. So now we need somebody to tell us something.
What leads to it going to a a dedicated missing persons team or a missing persons specialist, so to speak? Is it something to do with the passage of time, or is it just the facts and details of the case? What would make that happen?
A combination of things. Resources. Missing persons has a direct link to search and rescue personnel, civilian and police. So they have the ability to get information like, hey, we think that so-and-so's body might be in this general location. So they can, if that person's a missing person, put together all the search and rescue and go out and do that, where a detective and criminal investigation section doesn't have that opportunity or ability to do those things. So it depends on resources, how much time, where it is. Like, what more could I have done as a detective in my area other than to interview those people, search the area, and get search and rescue to search the area. I helped put up those missing posters. I remember going over to the local pub a bunch of times. I had an informant that used to hang out there, and I'd always be in there asking, looking around. I carried this with me for a while. So, yeah, there's only so much you can do as a general detective, even missing persons. This file perhaps sat in a binder on some shelf because there's no new information. And what can you do? You can't go get video surveillance. You can't even go to the pub or neighbors and say, have you seen them? It's just you need something new. So once it was done, and then missing persons follows it up after if they get any new leads.
And eventually this becomes investigated as a homicide. And I don't know if there is like this official classification as we, the police, believe this to be a homicide, or if it's just we're going to pass it to this department or look into it as if it is a homicide. But eventually that is what happened with Dylan's case. It is said to have been investigated as a homicide. When you learned that, were you surprised to hear that it is being investigated that way, or would it just make sense that is the kind of the trail that this case took?
That's just a classification. A rose by any other name is still a rose. So my point is you can call the homicide investigation, you can call the missing persons investigation, call what you want. The same things are still getting done. And the same things are still getting done as far as the investigative process. Do you understand what I'm saying there? Yeah, it might be easier now for the family if they need to get death certificates, because I was reading they're having a tough time doing that or whatever else. It might help if that's the case, but otherwise, the investigative process, everybody's got the same resources, homicide and missing persons. But, there's no evidentiary stuff that you're going to send off to the RCMP lab to get tested because there's nothing new.
Because it isn't there. Yeah, it's just, and the reason I bring that up is it was kind of like in the media, it was put out as if CBC's investigation into this case led to the Edmonton Police Service to label it a homicide and redo some of their work to kind of catch up with the exposure CBC brought to the case. But do you have any thoughts on why they would use terminology like homicide investigation after the media gets involved?
I don't really know. Maybe to placate the media. Who knows?
Yeah,
like I said, call it what you want. The media could say what they want, and if you just want to keep them at bay, okay, we'll call it a homicide. Whatever you want. You can call it whatever you want. We're still doing the same work.
Yeah, no, that only makes sense. And now you said yourself that this is a case that has stuck with you for years. Of course, Dylan's family still does everything they can, or seems to do everything they can to keep attention on this case, and in hopes, I'm sure, that new leads will surface. But with your experience and your background, having worked on this case, what do you like? Do you think that this? Have you seen cases like this get solved after this much time? If so, what will it take to solve a case like this? Because you've already said it yourself. It just seems like there's not really any new evidence to pursue. But somebody out there must know something. Like, what will solve this? And do you think that will ever happen?
First we're working under the assumption that somebody does know something, or that does somebody out there know something, perhaps, or have they taken it to a grave? Who knows? It's very difficult, especially I remember hearing the previous show, they talked about, if you have a group of 5 friends or 4 friends and you've done something, you better be aware that somebody might speak if they run into problems. So I haven't seen anything like this before in my career that I recall, at least. Somebody needs to come forward and say something if they do know something in order for this thing to move forward, because without that, it's at a standstill. Unless some bones get discovered and DNA proves it's him, or I don't know. There's nothing more physical that we can examine, or we can only talk to people or hope they talk to us, or to the police. I'm not a police officer anymore.
Yeah, but of course. But with a case like this, if something did happen at that night, there's several people in the home who would have had to been involved. It would seem unlikely that after all this time, someone didn't, cooperate with police and try to, get out of it somehow. Like, I would be surprised that 3 people could keep a secret for that long, but it is a little different situation because these were all cousins, with the exception of Nick's girlfriend, who were in the home at the time. So that kind of puts a little star at a group of people can't keep a secret. But what do you think about the possibility that he was able to just walk away from the home and for whatever reason, be it his own decision or some kind of accident or something, he managed to pass away and nobody found him? Like, did this happen in an area that you would find it unlikely that he met his end for somehow, but nothing was discovered in terms of remains?
There are cases where people have been put down sewers and discovered. Well, that Twitchell case, actually, that guy was put down a sewer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so they had just stopped searching the sewers just before the area where the body was. So there was, I remember hearing from within that there was a strong suggestion that maybe there was another altercation away from the house with people not related to him, so that he got it. Basically, I'm saying he got into a fight later on after he left, and that it was looked at, but I don't know to what extent.
Mhm. And just to discuss the likelihood of that, it would make sense that he's walking out of the home having drank a bit. He's heated from the incident with his cousin. I guess it could be plausible that something else happened, down the road a ways. I could see something like that. And you mentioned a highway nearby, which opens up the rest of Canada to
Yeah.
this story as well.
Yeah, as far as being involved with somebody nearby after the initial disturbance, it's a strong likelihood
Mhm.
from what I.
It just makes for just as a layman looking at this case from the outside, it just seems like such a big coincidence, though, that something would happen to lead to your death shortly after an unrelated incident involving a 911 call. But I guess stranger things have happened. But
That's why I remember
guess
it, though. I remember it because it was a surprise to me as well when I learned it.
You've mentioned a few times that there wasn't really any evidence, physical evidence or whatnot. Do you recall any kind of evidence that was gathered in the early days of this investigation, other than, of course, looking around the home or any and such? But do you recall any evidence that you ever got your hands on that you thought, ooh, this might be it?
No, I didn't touch anything that indicated anything to me at all. I had nothing. I remember being in the kitchen. It was clean. I remember seeing there's a knife in the sink, but we're talking 6 days later. And so it's typical kitchen, and it seemed clean. And there's nothing. There was nothing to gather. No papers, documents. I remember hearing about his wallet being found. I think that's when the search and rescue people came in and did the canine search and civilian searches. They found his wallet in the neighbor's yard. I wasn't privy to that. I didn't have that. All I had was the people and in the interviews I did, that piece of bloody paper towel.
And it seems like that was, yeah, and it seems like that's the only thing this case has. As an investigator, you're going to look at the scene and you're going to talk to the people that were there,
Yeah.
and without any of them breaking or their stories contradicting each other to the extent of follow-up interviews where you're really putting pressure on, there's not much to go on here.
That's exactly right. The only other thing I thought about it after I left there, carried it with me for a number of years. I had a great interest in knowing what kind of fight took place in that kitchen landing area. And I thought to myself, boy, would I have liked to have brought in our ident section. And I don't know if you're familiar with luminol the kitchen to see if there was blood that had been cleaned up. Quite often I do that with scenes. But I thought, well, what would that really show me? If, let's say, I did a luminol investigation of that area that the fight happened and I found blood splatter that had been cleaned up. I already know there's a fight. So I wouldn't be surprised if there'd be blood there and that it would be cleaned up. So that wouldn't even have helped. I already know there's a fight.
Much like the situation with the paper towel. But that said, if you find the entire kitchen had been soaked in blood, is a different story, I guess.
Exactly. But now I have to go a bit further. And is that for me to do, or is that for missing persons to do? And would we get a warrant? If we're successful in getting a warrant, then we do it. Or could we ask these people and get their? Because up to that point, we were just working on permission. If you want to search somebody's place, and you're a police officer, you tell them, look, I'd like to take a look around, search this place if I could. You don't have to let me do that. And if you do let me do that, and you tell me at any point, stop doing your search, I have to stop doing it. These are the type of parameters police have to work in. So we were faced with that. We did get a look around there. They were good. They were helpful, but there wasn't really an investigative aid that really would have boosted this forward, maybe, except for the luminol in the kitchen. But I don't know. It was never done, though.
Mm-hmm. Like the luminol, that's a good point, but it's kind of if you ask a person, I want to search your house or do this or that, and they say no, you then can apply to get a warrant to do it despite them not wanting you to. But you couldn't apply for a warrant based on a Hail Mary. Like you couldn't say, I want to do a luminol because I got nothing else to go on. I'm just going to roll the dice and see what happens. Something like that. Like, would a warrant be approved under those grounds, or do you need something to compel like a luminol test to be the next obvious step in the investigation. And I'm asking this question just to wonder, like, how hard actually is it for a homicide detective to do these things?
It would have been a test of the court systems, I think, in regards to the information to obtain a search warrant, where you'd have to put in your grounds for wanting to get this search warrant. And perhaps in this case, it might work, say, look, we're privy to the knowledge that a fight had occurred in there. We're hoping that luminal examination, if it is positive, would show us potential blood loss of a subject. And it may lead us to have better understanding of whether or not somebody was able to walk away from, because no one else was injured. There was no injuries, no scrapes or cuts on anybody's hands. I'm getting at, like, could you convince a judge that, something more has happened here and that this examination is going to help us determine if somebody's alive or not, potentially? Mm-hmm. So it'd be a stretch. It may be difficult, but it may not. I don't know.
Yeah. And what about like something like polygraphs in a case like this? Would this be a case? I don't know if it had polygraphs, but if it didn't, would this situation perhaps justify the use of polygraph testing?
Perhaps it could. Yeah. Again, those are voluntary, and they're not admissible in court, so it's just an investigative aid. Where we could use it for interview and interrogation technique, get the results, and if they're deceptive, then you put the pressure to the guy and you let him know, and then go from there. So it's something that is viable. I don't know if it was done in this case. Those take up. You have to book an appointment, and polygraph tests are not just hook the guy up to the machine. We're talking 5-6 hours type of thing. So. It's not just hook up, here's 4 questions and move on. So I don't know if it's ever done. To be frank with you, I don't even think I looked at it. It wasn't even something that I was prepared to even go that route with at that stage, because I was basically the initial response officer to this, like the patrol constable.
Mm-hmm. Only other thing I'd like to ask you is, I'm sure Dylan Koshman's case isn't the only case that you worked on during your career that has remained unsolved, but could you just give me a sense of what it's like at this point in your life to have these cases you've worked on without an answer? How often do you think about this? Do you lay down in bed at night and revisit facts of cases from 30 years ago? Like, I just can't imagine touching these cases as closely as you have and not having the mystery just eat me alive. Like, what is that like?
I think this is the only one I have hanging over me right now. And I had a sense this was going to come to this. I figured this is going to be did you ever, Punky Gustafson? She was a young girl that was killed in Edmonton. And that one went unsolved until the homicide detective was retired. So I kind of pictured myself when I was 68 years old or so testifying in this case about what I did in the initial portions of it when somebody finally gets arrested.
But I guess that's a part of the job, working in police and working in cases like this. You're going to deal with this later in life.
Yeah. I try not to carry things with me. Police work is a big deal in a person's life, and it puts you into a certain realm of thinking and how to do things, and you have to deprogram yourself coming out of that. And if you carry too much with you, you're not going to have a good life afterwards. So I don't think often of any of these things. They're still there, but they're in a place that they should be, and that's not in the forefront of my mind.
I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Nighttime. If anyone has any information related to the disappearance of Dylan Koshman, please do the right thing and contact the Edmonton Police Service. 15 years is far too long for these questions to remain unanswered. And anyone out there who, after listening, has a theory on what may have happened to Dylan, or if you think there's any information on this case that we missed, we'd love to hear about it. You can send me a voice message at nighttimepodcast.com/contact, and I'll do my best to include your information in the next episode. And if any of you listening have a connection to this case and would like to share your story here, please reach out. I'd love to keep rattling this tree and see what falls out. And with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up the episode, but before I do, let me end with some thanks. First, a big thanks to Tom Wilson for sharing an evening with me and for sharing his experiences and memories with all of us. A big thanks to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this show, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. And on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Christina, Larissa, and Hannah, we appreciate you. If anyone else would like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money funds the creation of the show. But the premium feed will also give you the show 2 days early, give you the episodes ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should listen. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to submit a question or comment, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. I look forward to hearing from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
Is there anything we didn't talk about that you think you want to get into or offer up or share?
I'm just trying to think. I don't think so. Like, I hope it's understood that I was part of this, but it's a dead end. You know, we need something more, or they need something more, because without somebody saying, okay, I saw him here, or I know where he's at now, or whatever, we can't find that. But they can't as police officers. So, yeah, I hope it works out. It's in my mind, how can he be alive? I just don't see it.